Okay, we're going to make a start. We're a little bit delayed, but for the speaker's benefit, don't worry, that won't eat into your time. We'll just have a slightly less time at the very end for discussion. Welcome to this session on effectiveness and resources. It's been great that the head of our School for Social Care Research is an economist. We were just talking about Martin out there. It does mean that questions of effectiveness and resources have never been very far from the forefront. So, welcome to this. We've got three speakers here. We're going to begin with a presentation about shared lives. So can I welcome on stage Grace Collins? And I've already ruined it for you, because that was already on there. I will waggle these at you.
Thank you. Okay, afternoon everyone. So yes, I'm here today to talk about our project Shared Lives, Evidence of Effectiveness, which was a multi-method study of a community service for people with intellectual disabilities. So it was funded by the SSCR and it ran from 2015 to 2018. It ended right at the end of last year. And the aims of the project were to see who are the people being supported by Shared Lives, is Shared Lives meeting people's needs, what are the experiences of Shared Lives carers, and is there an economic case for Shared Lives? And we used a multi-method approach to look at all of these different aims. So just to give you an outline of how the presentation will run, I'll just cover what Shared Lives is it's quite a small service so people might not be aware. I'll cover who are the people being supported by Shared Lives, some of the demographics and the measures that we used, our peer researcher work. We'll cover the care experiences and some of the findings that we have found so far, and then the economic case. So I've got a lot to get through, so sorry if I seem like I'm going through this quite quickly. So Shared Lives, what is it? Shared Lives is a family-based support service where the individual that needs help and support goes and lives with the Shared Lives carer, or host it's called in some places, and so the family home of the carer is used as the resource. So it's quite unique compared to other more typical services out there. There are quite a range of arrangements in place. So they do residential or long-term. There's also respite available in this setting. Day support, where the person who needs support goes again to the person's house for the day. And there's also rehabilitative support and outreach as well in some places. Their main client group is intellectual disability, but they do some older adults as well. And people that need to be re-entered into the community. A full matching process takes place, so this can take several months depending on the situation, where the person who needs support and the person who's providing the care are matched in a very thorough way. So if the person being supported wants to be around young children and animals and take walks in the countryside, hopefully they won't be placed in the centre of London with a family with no children, and so that everything is taken into consideration. So hopefully when they're joined up with the host family's community, they've all got things in common. So the Shared Lives schemes approve and train and match all of these Shared Lives carers, and they're mainly run by local authorities, but there are some that are done as outside of local authorities, and they monitor all the Shared Lives placements, make sure they go into plan and everyone's happy. But overall, Shared Lives is very under-researched, it's quite small, although it is very established. So I think in 2013, just under 10,000 people were being supported across 121 schemes. So compared to other services, it is very small. So we collected data on people that were being supported by Shared Lives. We asked local authorities to help us with this. The aim was to see who was being supported and was it meeting their needs. The measures we used were a My Shared Life tool, which was actually done in a previous project and developed alongside Shared Lives Plus, who are the overarching, I suppose, part of overarching of shared lives, so they support local authorities, although they don't run shared lives. So they give advice and yes. So that was an outcome measure, and it used 3 of the questions from the Adult Social Care Outcomes Toolkit, but and the rest were developed uniquely along with Shared Lives Plus. To go alongside this, we used the ICECAP measure for adults, looking at capability. We used the Warwick Edinburgh Mental Wellbeing Scale, the short version, and then we also did an overall quality of life rating and an overall health rating. So just some demographics of who we actually looked at. So we collected data on 39 people who were being supported by Shared Lives. The main type of placement was long-term and short breaks. The main client group was intellectual disability, as to be expected, and the average age was 36 years old. Mainly white British, most were single and never married, and we had 13 males and 22 females. Okay, so the My Shared Life tool. So you can see the labels hopefully slightly at the bottom of this graph here. And what we mean by high needs is that all of the questions are worded in a way that the bottom option meant high unmet needs. So overall, it was bad in that area. We also, the some needs meant that it was worded in a way that was not enough. No needs meant no unmet needs, so it was okay. An ideal state was it is great. So from this, we can see that occupation seemed quite positive to start with, because actually there was no one answered to high unmet needs, so no one said it was completely bad. However, the orange area is still quite large, so there was still a lot of some needs, so some unmet needs. So it's definitely an area for improvement. There was also quite a large area actually of people that selected some needs for emotional health. However, what we need to look at is when these people were actually entered into the service, because a lot of these might have been initially being entered into Shared Lives. So we need to look at time frame for that. But overall, we can see they answered really positively actually for feeling part of the community and social life. And because of Shared Lives, of how unique it is in terms of you're included in the host's community, that is actually, it seems very, very relevant for the unique aspects of Shared Lives, and that's really positive that those are the most positive areas. So the ICECAP measures enjoyment and pleasure, achievement and progress, being independent, love, friendship and support, and feeling settled and secure. And the scoring is 4, which means all, a lot, or completely. 3 is quite a lot or many. 2 is a little, and 1 is unable to have any or cannot have any. So it's all done in a positive way. So enjoyment and pleasure would be, I can have a lot of enjoyment and pleasure, I can have quite a lot of enjoyment or pleasure, I can have a little enjoyment or pleasure, or I cannot have any enjoyment or pleasure. So just to give you an idea. And then people rate themselves on that scale. And here are the results. So we can see that one person did actually tick for feeling settled and secure, that they weren't settled and secure at all. And that was one person out of the 39, so that is something to look further into if you with the individual. Being independent actually had quite a lot of people select a little or a few, so that's not as positive. But as we can see, love, friendship and support, actually the majority picked quite a lot, many or all, which was really positive for this data collection. And also enjoyment and pleasure, that was really positive as well. I think there was about 65% selected that, of quite a lot or many or all, which again was really positive. And the more positive, this is all summed up and calculated of a mean weight and out of 1, and the general score was 0.81. So what we'd want to look at further is how this compares to other groups of people. And so the Warwick Edinburgh Mental Wellbeing Scale, we used the short version, so the 7-question one. And the scoring is done on a scale of 1, none of the time, 2, rarely, 3, some of the time, 4, often, 5, all of the time. And again, these were all done on a positive scale, so we go from negative to positive in the colour chart. So none of the time, rarely, some of the time, often, all of the time. So we can see that feeling relaxed and feeling useful, no one actually ticked the bottom option, which is very positive. And we had quite a large majority actually tick often, all of the time for feeling relaxed, which is really great for shared lives. And also making up own mind and feeling close to others, I'm just pointing them out as also being extremely positive. As you can see, a huge amount of people either picked often or all of the time for those ones as well. And just to give you an idea of what this looks like against the general population, the mean score for the general population is 23.6, and our sample mean score was 24.5, so actually slightly higher than the general population. Now, obviously, our sample size wasn't that large, but just to give you an idea of what it looks like in comparison, it seems to be meeting a lot of the needs of people using the service. Okay, so the next part of the research was our peer researcher part, where we actually recruited some Shared Lives users to actually interview their peers. So they did some peer-to-peer interviewing for us. And again, they were recruited through Shared Lives Plus. Here are our 3/4 research co-researchers here. And what we did with them, we actually run very thorough training and information sessions. So we developed all the questionnaires with them of what we were going to ask of their peers. They were best placed to actually say what they felt needed to be asked about people's experience. And then in the training and information sessions, we went through what makes a good interviewer, what they wanted, how much they wanted from us. Did they want us to come with them to the interviews, even just to press the tape recorder? Did they want us to set up the interviews, or did they want to do that themselves? So we had quite a few meetings going through all the process so that we could help them as much as possible in fulfilling this role and feeling like they've got something out of it. And overall, they did 15 interviews, so we were really pleased with that, and they thoroughly enjoyed it as well, and we thoroughly enjoyed working with them. And we will be writing an article on how we've done the co-researcher aspect. A colleague of mine actually presented on this in Athens as well, so hopefully it'll be out there by the end of the year for everyone to read as lessons learned. But the actual results from this, we found that what carers help with in general, which is things like daily living, finances and occupation. We asked them what life was like before they actually moved into shared lives, and people said they were in various situations, usually moving from place to place, living in hostels, and people spoke of having depression, having difficult family relationships, because they were in instances where they couldn't live with their family, and they couldn't help as much, but they still wanted a relationship there, and they couldn't seem to find a happy ground for that. We asked them how their life has changed since being in shared lives, and basically they just said it changed completely, and they do more activities, they were much happier. And one of the peer researchers actually said they wanted to ask, would you change anything? And so we added that into our questionnaire, and basically everyone said no. They didn't want to change anything now they were in shared lives. So that was really positive. We also did some of the carer work. So we conducted qualitative interviews with some shared lives carers to find out their experience. We mainly wanted to find out about the impact on family, the challenges they were facing on actually having someone come to live with them in their family home, and what support they needed to fulfil this role. 4 local authority schemes were involved in this, 36 interviews were conducted overall, and we used a general inductive approach to look at the results. So overall what we found was, we found shared life carer role included things about what they do, their motivations for going into the role. So this varied quite a lot. Some people had background in social care already, or they'd been in other social care settings, or they just had space in their home and they wanted to make a difference to the community. They also told us what skills they thought were relevant to the role. I think the skills they mentioned were things like having a good sense of humour, being a good communicator, being open-minded. And we also spoke about their experience, so what were the positives, challenges, and especially with the uniqueness of introducing someone into your family life. So a lot was covered around privacy, having children in the home as well, and having someone coming into your home and having to include them as family, but then there were still set rules by the local authority about how much you can include them into your family. So not being able to buy Christmas presents, that was always a bit of a contentious issue. And something that they all seem to have to overcome in their own way. What factors affected their experience? So a lot was mentioned about scheme policies. Respite was an issue that was brought up a lot, and this was because local authorities actually really vary on their respite policies. So some local authorities, you have to organise your own respite. Some you don't get paid for, you have to pay the carer. Some just pay for it all completely. So that was definitely something that affected the shared lives care experience. But also having family who are around to support you, but they're your backup carers as well, because that was mentioned a lot, that sisters, other family members would step in basically if you couldn't care for that person, because it is a constant caring role. Placement characteristics, so what are the service users' characteristics, how much care and support do they need? So shared lives was always intended to be quite low-level needs, but actually a lot of the carers we interviewed had service users in there who had actually really high-level needs, who wouldn't usually be in this service, but the local authorities were lucky to have carers on board that were happy to take those higher needs. And also a lot of them fostered prior to shared lives. So a lot were going from fostering, turning 18, they still needed support. And some of these people have been cared for since they were potentially 5 years old. They wanted to keep caring and supporting them, so they moved into the shared life scheme because it was for over 18s. So that I'm currently in the process of writing that up, so that will be out by the end of the year, hopefully. And then finally, is there an economic case? I can rush through this because this wasn't my part and my colleague isn't here today, so please don't ask me any questions on this. But we looked at, it was just an exploratory look at the economic case for shared lives, and we did pen pictures of 4 people with intellectual disabilities in long-term placements, as that was the most common. So we already looked at the quantitative measures, but we did a client service receipt inventory as well, and we looked at prices using the unit costs of health and social care. And the exploratory analysis showed that costs appear to be lower than for alternative residential settings. So this is small numbers, there's no comparison group, but we definitely need to explore it further and in more detail, and it needs more money. So overall, we have a picture of people entering shared lives arrangements, but we need more about their going from the initial shared lives and then through their going through shared lives into the when they've been in the service for a lot longer. It seems to show that it is meeting the needs of people, and it is quite positive. And also with the carers, they were always very positive about the impact they were having, however difficult it was. As normal, more research is needed. It's a very under-researched field. We were, I think, the past 2 projects we've done have been some of the forefront of the shared lives research, but we definitely need more because it's such a unique service that is out there, and it seems to have such a great impact, and we hear such good stories about it that hopefully research in the future will, push it forward in terms of people knowing about it and being offered that service. And our next steps are to finish analysis, plan outputs with our peer researchers, which is on our to-do list, and disseminate the results. Thank you.
I was literally about to hold the stop card up. You've drawn a line in the sand for the next speakers. So, excellent, thank you. Do you have any questions for Grace?
Yeah.
Do we have any microphones? We do.
Go.
Well, we've got one, just in case anyone can't hear. Thanks.
Hi, thanks for that. That was really interesting. And that's my experience in the past as a social worker has been that shared lives is a positive intervention generally, and that also it tends to, as you said, cost less than residential care. I guess the concern is that, well, certainly my view on it is not that scalable, because basically, although there's quite a lot of demand for it, there's not much supply. The families aren't there to do it. Mm-hmm. Was that your impression from this? Do you think that's right, or?
From when we've worked with local authorities, especially in the first project, I think they are trying to do more to recruit host families, I suppose. And I think what was really not shocking, but really showed in this project is the variation in need. So originally, as I said, it was really low level need. And I had one carer in particular who the person was so independent that they didn't even have to have cover when they went on holiday. They just needed a bit of emotional support. And I think that's what Shared Lives always intended, but now there is the higher level need. And I think some families are, they're really up for that and they're happy to take people on board. But when you have someone who needs 24/7 care, it does place extra pressure. I think they're the people that have probably had a lot of background in social care settings and that type of care. Because there were people, and the carers did speak about a lot of the constantness of the caring, because there's not a time off, they can't be spontaneous. Friends coming round, even some people where the client might not like strangers being in the house, whether that be family or friends. So I think it's hard because of the range of people that are using the service, but they're trying to do more to recruit.
Any other questions? Got one more just there.
Hi, so I'm a social worker as well, and generally very positive experiences for the clients. I wondered whether there was any consideration in your research about the impact on practitioners. So from a practitioner point of view, in my team, we are hesitant to place with Shared Lives because the time demand on practitioners is so high, because of the needs of the hosts and the person who's using the Shared Lives service. And so obviously that has to play into how effective something is if actually your practitioner is then spending hours and hours in a week dealing with something. That has to play into the kind of overall economic cost. So I wondered if you'd considered that at all.
No, we hadn't, and I think it's not something that has, we definitely thought about it, but we didn't include it in this research. And because it's so under research, we've sort of, gone in to try and find our first initial thoughts. But this is something that definitely needs to be considered, because local authorities are struggling to promote Shared Lives, get it out there. And we hear all the time about practitioners. Do they know about it? Are they talking about it? Or what's those reasons behind? So it would actually be good to put the research to that and actually show what the issues are. And a lot of this work is pushed by Shared Lives Plus, they, of their interest, whereas that side of thing will be the more local authority interest in research of, I suppose, the strains that are on them in actually doing this service.
Okay, thank you very much indeed, Grace. We'll now move on to Michaela Tonelli's project, Making the Economic Case for Adult Social Care. Oh, I don't know.
Good afternoon, everybody. So from the title of the presentation, it appears that we are looking to a little tiny thing today together, making the economic case for adult social care. So I think that just a couple of slides, and then I will leave the floor, really. So the first slide, why the project, why Essence? And yeah, from the presentation in the morning, from the plenary, I got a bit relieved, because from Chris, we know that we need to gather more economic evidence around adult social care. This is pretty much needed, and we need to make such evidence more available to the different decision makers to inform better their decisions. And of course, we need to improve their understanding of the evidence available. So we need to provide more training, guidance, materials that is very much relevant to them. So and therefore we need also to identify if there is any lack in the literature, and therefore future research can be of help. But a lot that has been already done. So there is a lot done by NICE, for example, with their guidelines, and other bodies. So is there any, there is very much needed Essence? Yes, I think so, because We need to communicate better evidence in more accessible way to everybody, not just the researcher community. And therefore, we need to be quicker in communicating the evidence, maybe quicker than NICE. So NICE, with their guidance, can provide a very robust exercise, but it might take some time, few years, to hear about their final product. So with this sort of project, we can add new evidence more quickly and maybe provide the evidence that is not currently mentioned in public exam guidance. And of course, a lot has been already done. So what we can do is also to channel better people and to go to the updated evidence available. So what we did with the Essence basically was to run a series of exercises of searches. We looked into different sources, for example, the SSCR project, and I'm pleased to say that we didn't forget about the shared life. So shared life is within our database, but we looked also into NICE guidelines and more. We tried to cover relevant evidence around published research, but also we looked into ongoing progress, and so we wanted to highlight to people the future, the forthcoming findings. As part of the Essence toolkit, we have 3 different elements. First of all, we have individual case summaries. They are written in non-technical language, so they are pretty much accessible to everybody, and they are basically covering an array of interventions. And I will talk a bit about more the selection criteria in a minute. So we source good evidence, but if good evidence was not so much available, still we looked into mixed design studies. We have then, on top of the individual case summaries, a larger searchable database. And within the super mega database, we have all the economic evidence that we were able to extrapolate from the different sources. On top of that, we felt that was quite needed to have a glossary of what is cost effectiveness, what is quality, so people can quickly go and check and document themselves. But also other useful resources are there, such as training courses that are forthcoming, publication that will be made available out of the project. This presentation, for example, will be on the website, so a lot of things. And of course, everything really was done with the support of the key expert, and a big thank you to all of them. I saw them around today, and a few of them are in the room just now, so without their support we couldn't make it. So what they did really was to guide us in the selection of everything on the intervention, and pretty much to keep us on focus. So what we had really, how to select the intervention, what to be covered by the Essence toolkit. This was a big question, but in a sense we were lucky because the National Audit Office just published, when we were looking into it, a nice and quite robust conceptual framework. So we took it, and of course there was a nice infographic attached to it, and I did my best to replicate it today. So what we have is all the service provision by local authorities, but for us we focus on adult social care services, and here are the core set of interventions. And on top of that, we have a list of collaboration with other public services, with health, welfare, housing, and leisure. So I'll leave you to look into the details on the NOW website, but here is more or less the framework that we used, and of course we use these sort of terms to do all our searches across the different sources. And then what do we mean really with economic case? So what we mean is that we want to look into interventions that are cost effective, interventions that are affordable, and of course we want to pay attention to different type of costs, different type of outcomes. We didn't have an exact recipe. Of course, the type of costs and outcomes might vary across the different publications and evidence. And we looked into different budget sector systems, and pending on the individual publication, we had also different time periods. So in particular, what we wanted to identify were savings to different budgets, social care budget, but beyond, for all the public budgets if possible, but also other stakeholders. We wanted to look into employers, into the users, into the carers, And of course, when cost-saving data were not available, we still captured cost-effectiveness gains. So if there was opportunity to invest some money to have a return in improved outcomes, what I can say is that the toolkit didn't cover so much the cost of intervention per se. So we wanted to look more into the outcomes. Here is an example of the case summaries that we have. I think in the back of the room there are a few materials on 3 chairs at the back, so you can, if you want, you can keep an example with you of 3 different case studies are mentioned there in the back of the room. Here is, I mentioned about the unpaid carers. So just to give you a flavor of the structure of the case summaries. First of all, we have a cover page that can provide a very quick, accessible 5 minutes reading on the website. So you have the title, the authors, you have a bit about why this sort of intervention in the background, and the key points from the overall summary. If we are lucky enough to capture your attention, then what you can do, you can read more, you can download the full text of the case summaries that is written also in non-technical way, so it's very, very much accessible. So what we have as a structure within the case summaries, we have, as I said, the cover page is still there, but on top of that, we have more about the content. We have information about the type of interventions. We have information about the effectiveness, a bit about the sort of data that we just heard about the shared life case. So we have also about what people say. We have individual case stories or more. We, of course, have, in a nutshell, the key element of the cost-effectiveness data, and if there is opportunity also on the quality of the evidence presented. On top, to provide useful information, we have a flavor of the implementation, if there is any useful practice available, if there is any guidance around the design of the intervention and the implementations guidance. And of course, if there is more information, we can provide. If, for example, there is forthcoming papers that are due to be published, again, can be added in the other information. Or if there is a particular piece of evidence, such as NHR summary, again, this could be part of the link. And so people really are free to read the summary. If they want to have more information, they can refer to the reference list. We have all is hyperlinked with the full text, with the abstract, so people can actually read the information, the full information. And there is also a key contact that they can write to if they want to drop a few questions to the expert of the case. So 17 case summaries in total, and these 17 case summaries were able to capture about 25 of the adult care services that are embedded in the framework that I presented before. So how 17 can cover 21? So in a sense, we have, for example, one case summaries could have embedded more than one intervention. For example, NICE guidelines on intervention for dementia. We have an array of non-pharmacological interventions. In other cases, the same intervention could be described with different keywords as part of this framework. For example, discharge services for homeless people. In this case, we described the intervention in terms of care and support planning, integration, intermediate care, safeguarding. So there is a way of describing the service according to the framework. And of course, we looked at the super mega database as well. So in this case, we were able to capture 27 of the adult care services in the NOW framework. And the database of evidence is quite a useful tool because you have an online searchable tool. Basically, you can go online, you can look into searching evidence according to the source of the data, if it was a NICE guidelines, PSSRU project, or something else. according to the classification of the framework. You can check whether a particular project is completed or in progress. You can check according to the publication details, the authorship, the date, and etc. And of course, you can also double check whatever is embedded in a particular case summaries, and you can look into the in-depth evidence. And an extra layer of is that, of course, the database can be downloaded. So what you can do is to basically take the Excel file with you and do whatever you want. You can do all your filters, all your searches, enjoy yourself, and eventually click on the links because it's very much interactive. You can go to the full text and the abstract. Here about numbers. So we were able to recover 231 publications and projects. They are all part of this database of evidence. So sometimes, as I said, the same piece of evidence could be linked and described by multiple definitions, and other times the same piece of evidence was embedded in different sources of. So we had, at the end, we had 660 different hits. And of course, the same publication maybe was named by NICE and others. So we described the array of hits according to the different sources here. Lastly, just to give you a flavor of, again, around the database of evidence of the core set of services, adult social care services delivered by local authorities. As you can see, here is the list from the framework. In blue, we have the ones that occurred more than 30 times. So if we are looking to the number of counts of the publication, we can see, for example, care and support planning, assessing need, day services, care services, or home care. They came across more than, for example, direct payments. So here is just to give you a flavor of the toolkit and a few comments before leaving to José Luis. Well, I must confess that when I presented the data to Martin, he almost cried because there was very poor evidence there. And I was very upset. It took, a few 2-3 meetings, to overcome, to recover. But anyway, we tried to justify, in a sense, maybe it was the search strategies because was not so much robust, systematic review with, specific search criteria. Was more an approach, of data extraction guided by expert, and we looked into individual data sets selected by expert. But still, when evidence was available, not always was good evidence, and of course, again, when we had good evidence, not always this was accessible to the key decision makers. So this was an issue that we raised. And as we saw before, most of the economic evidence is attached to few services, home care, care services, day services, and there are few lacks in the framework. But you are very much free to look into the website. Is countdown now. You are almost ready to launch. So if you keep an eye, please do. You will see every day something more and more coming. Few case summaries and then the database of evidence and more. So we want to keep you busy in looking. And a big thank you to everybody that helped us. The advisory group, they were super magic. And in particular, Aya, that is in the room here. She helped us immensely looking into all the different case summaries, more or less. But also, of course, other experts were very crucial to support us in every steps of the research. And also Angie was a jewel in doing everything around the website. So a big thank you to everybody. Thank you.
Thank you so much indeed. Do you have some questions? Yvonne, I think we've got a microphone.
Thank you very much. I was just wondering, I know you kind of hinted that you'd be keeping it up to date, so I was wondering how you were going to do that.
Yeah, this is a big question because it's work in progress. I think there's been discussion and there will be more discussion to find hopefully a way to keep the service going. In fact, the case summaries, they have a publication date, so hopefully there will be opportunity to update them in due course, and of course to publish more as soon as more evidence is available. So this is something that definitely I think people is keen to do, and of course we have to find ways to do so. Yeah.
Any other thoughts or questions? I did have one actually, which was about the quality of the evidence that underpinned some of those summaries. Did you have like an assessment criteria or a threshold, or was it essentially a census of all the economic evidence you could find?
Yeah, this is a good question really, because it was a bit of a debate within the team really to secure, of course, the best evidence available. But at the same time, we wanted to allow for a breadth of intervention to be showcased with the case summary. So there is a bit of both, really, trying to see whether there is opportunity to present the best evidence available, and then, as I said, if the best evidence was not there, again, mixed studies were still sourced to provide some initial thoughts, of course. So, and in the case summaries, there is discussion about the quality of the evidence anyway, so you can still check
Yeah.
whether, you know, more, and if forthcomings will be there. So that's what we try to do.
Yeah, excellent. Okay, well, thank you very much indeed, Michaela Tonelli. So maybe by the end of the next 5 years of the School for Social Care Research, we'll have a bit more to and Martin won't cry anymore. I'll now welcome our last speaker on stage, Jose Luis Fernandez, and the opportunities and challenges of using administrative social care data.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
So, of course, being the last paper of the day is a huge responsibility because, you know, you get two sorts of situations. You might want to speak very quickly so that we all finish and go home as soon as possible. But if you do, you might wake up those people that have managed to fall asleep. So perhaps speaking very, very quietly but very fast is the solution. But perhaps nobody will understand anything. So anyway, one thing I'm going to say is that there are lots of graphs that I'm going to show. Now, I don't want to show all those graphs in order to look at the detail of those graphs and all the meaning from them. It's just, I want to use them to illustrate some of the points that I want to make. Okay, so don't worry if we move a little bit fast between slides. The slides, you've got them anyway, and I'm very happy to discuss, you know, either later on or some other day with you if you've got questions, specific questions about the slides. So first thing, also to acknowledge the colleagues that have contributed to this piece of work, some of whom are, I think, in the room. Also the 4 local authorities that we you know, contributed to the data that I'm going to explain. We started aiming for 10, and that is a lesson in itself. It was quite tricky to, you know, quite an effort to involve authorities in terms of the sorts of data sharing that we wanted to get. And then the usual disclaimer, which people have got at the end of the presentation, I've got at the beginning. And this is just a graph that helps me sort of put the context of the study. So at a simple level, a lot of the analysis that we want to do in terms of the evaluation of how well the social care system is doing is looking at basically the relationships between, in particular, those 3 big boxes. The yellow, the blue, and the green. So we want to understand people's needs and assets. Now I've got a new version of this where I put assets in the needs boxes because it's not just about the assets. And I was, you know, criticized by a social worker the other day saying, you know, you're being very negative. True, needs and assets. So that, you know, the characteristics of the person, you know, that we want to. The system needs to react to, I guess. The services, what is the system doing for those people? And outcomes, and without outcomes, you know, if we don't understand outcomes, and what's the point of looking at the system? The system should be achieving something. And if we can't manage to understand what it's achieving, then we can't really make a good judgment of whether the system is working. So, but, you know, those are very simple sorts of concepts that we're all used to, and yet we've got relatively little information about some of those, and indeed about the relationship between them. And so the idea behind the study was, to what extent can we interact with the data that exists, rather than think about a beautiful study that is going to cost £3 million and we're going to collect cases, data for, let's say, 1,000 cases that will then sort of age very quickly. Is there a way we can use the data that is within the system? What's the potential for the data within the system in order to evaluate equity and efficiency in the social care system? That was the question, I guess. And then, so it's about describing the boxes, but also the relationships between them. And so in what I'm going to, the key message is, we need a better understanding of this. And now I'm going to show some data and some trends on the, looking at needs, services, and outcomes. I will start from very simple trends, very simple analysis, which I still think are very useful, and certainly the local authorities were quite surprised with some of the trends that we showed them. And then we'll move on to more sophisticated analysis by the end. So, no, I'm going to skip that to save some time. That I've just explained, so we can skip that one, and we can start with the graphs, which is what I really like. You feel so much more comfortable when there's data there, and it's objective, and you look more believable, don't you? So this is basically, so what we did with the local authorities is we collected all their assessment data, all their service data, and the finances data for all the service users that they would have in the system, okay? And for whatever period of time they thought the data would be reliable, and they were happy to share it with us. And we've got 4 different local authorities. I won't go into describing those authorities. They're not, as a whole representative of England, but, they were never going to be. There are 4 authorities. And again, that's a challenge of this sort of analysis. But for LA1, here we're looking at numbers of all the people in the system, month by month, no, week by week, in fact. Is this week by week? It doesn't matter. Either week or monthly, it doesn't matter. But and what we're able to do, because we've got the assessment information, is to describe the characteristics of those people. In this case, in terms of their needs, which in their system, and that's another important point to make, describes them in terms of physical needs, in terms of none, some, moderate, substantial, or critical. Okay? And one important lesson is that the systems vary from one local authority to another. So in terms of assessment, at least, it's going to be very difficult to pool data together. Okay? So you're going to have to do analysis authority by authority. But once you do that, you do get some very interesting patterns. Understanding who's staying in the system and who's no longer receiving services. You see how that trend is going down? Fewer older people receiving services in local authority 1, but we know more about them. Well, that data doesn't exist at the national level. The sorts of data that Simon was describing this morning will not be able to give you that. It will tell you the total number, but it won't be able to tell you their characteristics. And this is just one way of describing them. We've got the whole assessment form. And the assessment form actually will collect more data than many of the studies that have been part of, because they've got more time to collect that data. The question is that data good enough for research? Because it's collected for a different purpose. So, different group, different authority. This is for people classified in the system as having learning disability. And you see how the trend is not going down, it's going up. This is in line with sort of national trends. And here, in this authority, we're able to actually count ADLs of exactly the same type as we would collect in a study, okay? And so blue means you've got no ADL problems. Red means you've got 5 ADL problems. You see how there's a trend, how the prevalence of ADL problems increases through time? Well, that's interesting, because there's all this discussion about more complex cases coming into the system with learning disabilities. Okay, it could be that. It could be that, and it's interesting if we're able to pick up that through these sorts of data, because there isn't another data source that will be able to, publicly available sources of data that will describe that sort of thing. So that's quite interesting. It could be quite a novel, but let me just show you the next one, which is not looking at ADLs. So ADLs, for those that can't see, 95% of you, eating, washing, dressing, toileting, and transferring here. Now we're going to look at IADLs. You see the trend there? The trend is much, much bigger. Now, that makes sense, because IADLs are probably much more relevant to people with learning disabilities. However, we're looking at a huge trend, a huge change in a period of 3 years, 2.5 years. Is that really because the needs of the people in the system are changing so rapidly, or is there something about? It's not the assessment framework, that didn't change, and we don't get these patterns for all the people, for example. But is there something about the way in which training is affecting, the assessment of needs? I don't know. But, this is a very, very stark, pattern. So on the one hand, very interesting. On the other, is it reliable? And that's, we're going to have that sort of question quite a lot. I need to move on. But, it's not just about the needs, which, as I say, we can describe in many ways. Packages of care. What are people getting, and how is that changing through time? So, for example, in Local Authority 2, we were able to describe numbers of all the people receiving home care at night, daycare, direct payments, meals, telecare, and reablement. And actually, it's quite striking that within a period of, okay, here we're looking at a bit more than 6 years, no? 6 years, more or less. So we see some big changes. I don't know whether, Mark had promised to give me a light, but what sort of chair is that? So look at meals. Can you see that actually? No, you can't. Okay. Gray. You see the gray? That's Meals on Wheels. You see what happens, I don't know, somebody saw the light in April 2013, I think, when this is rubbish. Why give Meals on Wheels, the Tesco Direct will do it. You see how that drops, the grey, and how it recovers again? The point I'm trying to make is that actually there are big changes in targeting of services that happen within a small period of time in local authorities. And that is very interesting because we don't know that, really, but also because it provides opportunities for assessment, for evaluation. So people here haven't really changed that much in their unique characteristics as people here, but they're going to have different care packages, and therefore we might be able to use those differences in order to observe the impact of different ways of providing support for people. You can see home care going down, the blue, that's the blue going down, telecare going up. There's a bit of a substitution happening there. Is that going to be cost effective? Well, very interesting question, but it is happening, that substitution. Okay, I need to go to move on. I'm going to skip I'll say one word about this. You can also look at the care package cost. These are for people with learning disabilities. The yellow one, which is growing, are people with very expensive care packages, over £1,000 per week. Interesting. And these are incredibly simple. Once you've got the data loaded, it's such the simplest of graphs. But actually, it was very interesting for us to see, very interesting for the local authorities to understand that, because they don't put it in this way. And actually, it led to very interesting discussions. You can not look at sort of trends at the aggregate level, but also distributions, which are a little bit more sophisticated. They take about half a second more to put together, but they're still very interesting. This is the care package costs for all the people, Local Authority 3, in the community, yellow there, or in institutions. You see how this is by model? There's basically, in institutions, residential care, nursing, two big peaks there. That's a standard sort of response in institutions for all the people. Look for younger client groups, completely different shape of the distribution. That's very interesting. It makes sense. There's going to be the range of needs for younger client groups is going to be very different, and therefore the system is reacting differently. But it's very interesting to see that. You also see, for example, very clearly how as you become more expensive, the likelihood of going into residential care increases very significantly, okay? So lots of questions that can be this analysis that you can think of on the basis of very, very, very simple data from the system. Another one that is critical in terms of the funding question, there's the care cap. The care cap relies on, the deal-nut sort of model, for example. It relies on information about how long people stay in the system and the lifetime costs. Well, a huge part of that curve is about how long people stay in residential care. Well, that's the sort of thing that you can describe very well on the basis of local authority data. And this is basically the survival curves for 4 local authorities, so just looking to see what proportion of residents stays on as the time goes on. Okay? Now, this is broadly in line with the assumptions made in the Deal-Nut Commission, for example, in terms of the package. But the other thing that was very interesting is that there was very little variation across local authorities. Well, we're doing more work to try to, fully capture this. But, very interesting data. Again, very simple analysis to do. And there is no other data. That's the key thing. Okay, now I'm going to go very quickly through this, even more quickly. You can do a bit more sophisticated analysis in terms of needs. Okay, well, are there typologies of needs? Can we group the needs of people in the system in ways that are meaningful? It's not that you want to then allocate a standardized care package on the basis of these groups, but that you might start thinking about typologies, because that might be quite interesting in terms of commissioning practices or in terms of thinking about potential opportunities for prevention, for example. And so we did some latent class analysis of local authority data on assessment to see whether we could define groups. In local authority, you have to do this local authority by local authority because the assessment data is different. But this is the example for local authority 2, looking at all the client groups. We also did it for younger client groups. These are sort of the characteristics of 3 classes that we identified based on, shows, I'm going to read them from left to right: eating needs, washing needs, dressing needs, toileting needs, and transferring needs, okay? You see how the first two groups are fairly similar, very high needs, whereas you've got the third group, which is much less dependent, okay? Now, there's further, of course, we can describe that in many ways. There's further information now in terms of dementia. The first group are people with high needs, but dementia. The second one, no dementia. The third group are people, this is dementia, basically. So you see how very high, prevalence of dementia and memory problems, risk, very high. Completely different picture, although from a physical needs perspective, they're very similar, group 1 and 2. And these are people that live alone, therefore lack of informal care. Very interesting. And then you can see the patterns of service use, which vary between those groups. But I haven't got the time to discuss that. I thought you were starting to get the letters. No, I'm going to get close to them.
There might be a pointer around there, where someone was saying. No.
Ah, there is one.
Don't really look.
Oh, look at that. And you had hidden it. Oh, it's terrible. Shall we start again with the pointer? So, now, of course, I said before, it's all about outcomes, isn't it? I mean, if we describe this, but we don't understand the outcomes, then... And so a key question and a key challenge for using this sort of data is, what can you say and do about outcomes? Because, we're not going to have many local authorities collecting quality of life. ASCOT, for example, or ISCOT, whatever it is that you think about, they don't collect it as a matter of course, okay? A few do, very, very few. And therefore, where do you get the outcome information from? You have to then look at things which are either destinational outcomes, what's the risk of going into a care home, into a hospital, if you're lucky enough and the local authority knows about it. Death, I guess you could see that as a destinational outcome. And again, if the local authority knows about it, or, and this is something that we thought would be very interesting to look at, you've got assessments through time. So what are your needs today? What are your needs next time you get assessed? Is the support you're getting affecting that? Basically, are you less dependent next time we look because of the benefits of the services that you're getting? So that was one way of extracting outcome information from assessment information. Okay, it's not quality of life, but it's a proxy for quality of life. Oh, another thing I wanted to say: if you methodologically, the other big challenge is that people with higher needs always get more services, and so in terms of outcomes, if you look at a correlation between outcomes and services, it's always negative. Yeah, so this is the way to illustrate it. You've got a group A, they've got relatively low needs, therefore their raw outcomes are very high, and they get relatively low service intensity. Yeah, but within that group, more services there. I've invented this data, so it works very well, of course. But more services within that group, higher outcomes. Then you've got another group, Group B. They've got much more intensive needs, therefore they get much more help, but their raw outcomes, their total outcomes, quality of life is going to be driven mostly by needs, and therefore it's lower. Okay, but within that group, positive effect, if you put them together, you always get this negative correlation. What is the conclusion? That you absolutely need to control for need as much as you can, because otherwise what you will be describing is the difference in need rather than the difference in outcomes. So this is the model, therefore, this is the model that tries to control for need, looking at institutionalization. So what's the risk that you're going to end up in a care home next month, given that you are in the community, an older person living in the community, and given your needs and the packages that you get? So lots of controls there in terms of needs, and that's what I was saying before. There's lots of indicators that you can actually get from the assessment form. This is informal care, which we find to reduce the risk. So there's a buffering effect of informal care. Well, that's reassuring. It's the sort of thing you would expect. And then we find significant effects for home care and direct payments and sitting services. Well, that's great. We're seeing some productivities, okay, on the basis of data from the system. Okay, and then you can illustrate those effects. This is just looking at how that probability of admission reduces as you get more expenditure. To be honest, most people are within these, there's very few people getting that sort of a level of care package. And you see, and this is quite important, it's quite illustrative of what we find most of the time, those effects reduce, the marginal effects reduce as you provide more and more, so decreasing returns to scale. And also, the effects tend to be greater for people with higher needs. These are people with very high numbers of ADLs. These are people less dependent, okay? Capacity to benefit increases the productivities. I'm going quite quickly, but that's, Now, the other thing that, you remember that, so that's a destinational outcome. The other type of outcome is whether you get better or you get worse, okay? In particular, whether we can prevent deterioration, yeah? Now, so how does that data, that raw data, look like? Because you're only going to observe that when you get a reassessment. So, what happens in between? Do we get any but actually, if things deteriorate, in particular, somebody's might phone the social worker in order to have a new assessment or to change the care package, and that might bring in a sort of another signal to the system. So how does it look when we actually look at, so this is numbers of months, and this is looking relative to your assessment, first assessment, are your needs going up, in which case this is the proportion that deteriorated, or are your needs getting better? This is for older people. And you can see how, two things. One is, by 2 years, about 40% have deteriorated. If you compare that against a reasonably comparable group in ELSA, you'll find a very similar proportion, which was very surprising. I thought we wouldn't find similar proportions. But also you see how, although there is a little bit of a kink here, you see how there is a bit of a kink? That's 13, 14 months, so basically reassessment reviews are taking more than 12 months, and there is a bit of a change in the pattern, but nevertheless it's quite smooth. So that was reassuring. Now these are all the people, look at younger client groups. The proportion getting worse is much, much smaller, which is exactly what you would expect because their needs are much more stable through time. Okay? So it was reassuring to see these patterns. Then we run the models in the same way as before, we control for needs, and we see whether we can see a difference in the rate of deterioration associated with how much support you get. These are again, the need controls, but these are the effects that we found. So we found for both home care and direct payments, you needed more evidence on direct payments, Michaela. Well, we found two sets of effects. Let's see if we can put it in the Essence library. But so the more home care you get, controlling for your needs, the more home care you get, the more direct payments, the lower your needs at the next evaluation, which is quite interesting. And that works for older people. It doesn't work for younger client groups. We don't find those significant effects. We also find, by the way, informal care, again, having that sort of buffering effect for older people. So, it's quite sort of interesting. So, some conclusions. I haven't even seen the card yet. Oh, God, So, I think, yes, there's great potential in using the information in the system, but there are, lots of caveats which I haven't majored on because, I was focusing on the positives, I guess. But first of all, we don't know about the reliability. A lot of the instruments, or the way of collecting data about needs is not necessarily validated. And we don't know two things. One is whether those measures work well, the psychometric properties, but also the way in which they are used. Because, as a care manager, I might not bother to explain whether somebody has got some sort of, some sort of condition which is not relevant to the case. And therefore, you don't want to use those data as equivalent to data you would collect for a study, okay, or for a survey. They're different, so we need to learn how to use them. The second point is that, obviously, this data is observational data. And so we need to improve our methods for using observational data to get at effects and cost effectiveness. And, it kind of works, but have we done enough to control for need, for example? A huge question. So we need to improve our methods. Then there are data gaps. So, for example, the title of the project was actually Developing an Evaluation Framework for Understanding Prevention. And prevention understood in terms of investment at any one point, thinking that home care might also have some preventative effect. But we also wanted to look at low-level interventions, assets-based approaches or information and advice. That's almost impossible at the moment. The data in the system is not good enough to look at that, at least that I've seen. So that is a limitation. Self-payers tend not to be included in these systems. There are some authorities that are collecting information about self-payers, but very, very few. Outcomes, as I've said, actually getting quality of life information from the assessment system, very few do. So you need to think about proxies or convince local authorities. And I think, one of the things we wanted to do in the future is to help authorities improve their information systems on the basis of the results we get. Because the better those information systems, the better for them as well. And then there are issues about data comparability across local authorities, both because the assessment forms are very different. You end up with, it takes a huge amount of effort to get the data to come to you. For some local authorities, it took us more than a year and a half. In a 3-year project, that is kind of undermining, and then you have to do all the analysis very quickly at the end. So there's a huge amount of effort in engaging, required. And as I said, we aimed for 10, we ended up with 4. And then there's the issue about the data comparability across local authorities. And then, so as I mentioned, the IG issues, the information governance at the moment is really, really challenging. And here we need more work from NHS Digital, really, and more reassurance for local authorities. At the moment, there are still lots of different views as to what is allowed, not allowed, how you should do this or not do this, and that tends to slow down the process massively. I think we need to do more work in terms of clarifying the steps so that we can all benefit from these sorts of data. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. That was dazzling. That was excellent. Do we have a microphone in hand? So
the threatening question.
Okay, that is on. Hello, my name's Robert. I work for a research team in West Sussex County Council. So you're talking about connecting with local authorities. We've got, of course, most authorities will have a performance team, an analysis team, or somewhere an insight team that they have locally just doing that. That's not what we do. But I was just wondering if you could give a bit more feedback on how the challenges developed for the local authorities to get you that data. How much time did it take, and why did it take so long? And if that could be reduced, how would that look?
Yeah. So first of all, I'm really, really grateful to the local authorities that collaborated with us. And in general, it wasn't not difficult to convince, let's say, the assistant director or the director that this was a good idea. You talk to them and they say, oh yes, we want to do this. Then when you start working with the performance team, which might have been moved from social care to the corporate sort of function of the authority, and therefore not just doing social care, doing other things as well, that's when it becomes difficult. But actually, once you need to understand what data they've got, the format, that doesn't take many meetings. And sometimes they needed to, in one authority, they actually hired somebody for a week to do just the SQL work to download this for us. And that was, I was very grateful. But most of the challenges with local authorities is the IG, is the ethics. And it's convincing people that this is, what is the public interest in doing this? What's the justification? Because you need to have you can't go down the route of asking every user for consent. And so you need to, how do you define this as a public? And that conversation, which could be, we could have something from the top that says, actually, if this is going to lead to improvements in services, it is okay for you to do it. But at the moment, that doesn't exist. And so there's a lot of, there's months of conversations about this. So that was the key, is more than the actual analyst time. That was the thing that took forever. But if you want us to have a look at your data, I'd be delighted. We are indeed, in the process of developing some partnerships. And that's very much the way I was trying to sell this with the authorities. It's a partnership, a long-term partnership, because it's going to be painful at the beginning for both. But once it's set up, it might be something that we can profit for a number of years. Wonderful.
Any other questions? And just linked to that, actually, I mean, because we know, well, I'm suspecting over the last 9-10 years there have been a lot of reductions in local authority capacity to be able to do data analysis. Is that your sense as well? And to what extent is this sort of saying that there's been cuts too far in that sense?
Well, we've seen that the teams have been reduced, that the teams are basically concentrated at the moment in doing a little bit of analysis for some sort of strategic local issues, but a lot of it is, the moment the returns, the SSCR, whatever it is that approach, that's it. They're not going to be able to do anything for you. And so there's a lot of capacity which is dedicated to, the duties of returns. And there was, for example, in one of the authorities, one of the ones with the best data, a new head of the analytical team came in and said, sorry, we can't afford it, finished. And that was heartbreaking. Because there was a lot of effort that was put in understanding the data and lots of things that we could have done with that data.
Question down here.
Hi, I'm Zella King from Care City, which is a healthy ageing innovation unit in Barking and Dagenham. I don't know if they were one of your LAs, but
no.
Actually the question...
But if they were, I couldn't say.
The question,
LA 1, 2, 3 or 4.
One of the things that intrigues me, and it builds on the conversation about commissioning this morning, is how much data providers have and how much they're willing to share with local authorities, because obviously you could build out a richer picture of what's going on the ground rather than just the assessment data that's done by the LA. So I wondered if you had any opinion on that.
Yeah, and we have been able to, so we have looked at, for example, Meals on Wheels service with nutritional supplements. That's one of the authorities that we were looking at, very keen to, and the provider very keen to demonstrate the benefits of that. And so we ended up getting their data. Matching the data, though, so because they've got the data about, well, sometimes they do have information about the characteristics of the person as well, but you want to take you want to have a full picture of the support package that person might be getting. And so what you want is to link the provider data with the local authority data. That is very, very difficult. Other linkages which are very difficult, user and carer. Both the user and carer might be in the system, but many authorities are not able to link the two, for example. But yes, providers. It's a fantastic opportunity. Sometimes you feel like you're going to audit them to some extent, and so there are issues about that as well. But some are very open. So that example, for example.
Any other final questions? Okay, thank you very much, Jose Luis. Excellent talk. Thank you. So just for me to say thank you very much for coming to this much bigger event. It feels than last year. I don't know if it's the more opulent surroundings, but it's been fantastic to see so many people here. And don't look forward to the external call for research grant applications coming next month that was talked about earlier on. And have a very safe journey back. Hope to see you next year. Thank you.